My sister lied to my parents to get me kicked out. Now she's asking for my help after getting evicted. I didn't even reply. I've always been the quiet one in my family, the guy everyone relied on but never really noticed. Growing up, I learned early that my voice didn't carry much weight at home. My sister Ava, she was the golden child, smart, charming, flawless in my parents' eyes. Every time she brought home a good grade, my mom would gush, "She's our little genius," while I'd get a polite nod and a, "That's nice, son." Even when I landed my first promotion at 23, my dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Good for you," he muttered, and that was it. Meanwhile, Ava's participation in a small art competition turned into a full-blown celebration, complete with balloons, cake, and selfies posted to the family group chat. I tried not to care, honestly. I told myself I was the dependable one, the silent backbone, and that was enough. I focused on my projects, saving quietly, doing my work without asking for attention. But the microaggressions started to pile up. Subtle at first, a sigh when I spoke, a quick eye roll when I shared a small accomplishment. A gentle, "You'll understand when you have responsibilities," that cut sharper than any insult. I could feel Ava's shadow growing over me, the way she leaned into every opportunity to shine. How my parents' eyes lit up when she entered the room while mine barely registered. I tried to stay invisible, thinking it would keep the peace. I believed if I stayed out of the spotlight, kept my head down, maybe I could avoid conflict entirely. But lately, I've started noticing little things that don't add up: furtive smiles exchanged behind my back, hushed conversations that stop when I walk into the room, a sudden increase in scrutiny over things that never mattered before. I thought I could live quietly, stay under the radar, and avoid the storm, but Ava had other plans, and I'm starting to see the first hints of what she's willing to do to make sure I never get noticed again. It started with small things that didn't seem like much at the time. Mom would double-check whether I'd finished my chores, even though I'd been doing them for years without complaint. Dad would ask me questions that felt like tests. "Did you really handle that project at work yourself?" But never asked Ava anything similar. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I started noticing the way Ava leaned a little too casually against the doorframe whenever I spoke. That faint smirk that disappeared when my parents glanced her way. One evening, it hit me full force. We were all in the living room, and I was telling my parents about a small freelance project. I'd been working on a website I built for a local nonprofit. I was proud of it, proud enough to finally speak up. Mom barely looked up from her phone, and Dad gave a vague, distracted, "That's nice, son." But Avashi tilted her head, eyes wide, feigning shock and admiration. "Wow, that's amazing," she said, louder than anyone else. "I had no idea you were doing something like that." My stomach twisted. It wasn't genuine. It was calculated. My parents leaned in, hanging on her praise instead of mine. Later that night, I overheard Ava on the phone with her friend, whispering, "He thinks he's doing all this stuff, but they'll never care. I just have to make it sound worse, and Mom and Dad will side with me." My heart dropped. I couldn't believe she was talking about me like that, planning, scheming, turning my quiet life into a problem for her own advantage. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I started paying attention to everything after that. The subtle digs at family dinners, the way my suggestions were dismissed as too ambitious or not practical, and the constant comparisons to Ava. I realized this wasn't just favoritism. It was a deliberate effort to paint me as the problem child, the invisible one who didn't deserve attention or support. I thought I could keep my head down, stay out of trouble, and avoid drama, but now, every conversation, every glance, felt like the beginning of a trap. And deep down, I knew Ava was setting it, brick by brick, while I walked right into it. I tried to ignore it. Really, I did. But the lies were subtle, like poison seeping into every corner of my life without me noticing until it was too late. It started with small things: claiming I had left a mess in the kitchen that wasn't mine, telling Mom I had been rude or careless when I hadn't said a word. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe she misunderstood. But then I realized she wasn't misunderstanding at all. She was planning, manipulating, and watching my every move, waiting for the perfect moment to use my silence against me. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Mom and Ava in the living room, whispering and giggling. I froze at the doorway, heart pounding. "Did he really leave the sink like that again?" Ava asked sweetly, tilting her head innocently. Mom nodded, eyes sharp. I think he's just careless sometimes. I've asked him to be more responsible, but my blood ran cold. I hadn't even been home yet that day. I confronted her quietly later that night. "Ava, I didn't leave the sink dirty," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She smirked and shrugged. "Really?" Maybe Mom just didn't understand. You know how she gets? That casual dismissal, it stung more than any insult could. I felt cornered, small, like a child being gaslighted by the person who was supposed to be my sister. Then came the mid-twist, the moment that made everything click. I overheard her laughing with her friend again. Once I tell them he's irresponsible, they'll kick him out for sure. He's so gullible. He'll never see it coming. I backed away, chest tight, stomach twisting. It wasn't just petty teasing or favoritism. It was a full-on campaign to make my parents see me as a problem. As someone who didn't belong, I felt trapped, helpless, and furious all at once. Every step I'd taken quietly to build a life, every project, every achievement, they were being rewritten into flaws by my own sister. And as I stood there that night, listening to her plot, I realized just how deep the betrayal ran, how far Ava was willing to go to make me disappear. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, Dad called me into the living room, his face tight, Mom sitting stiffly beside him. "We need to talk about your future," Dad began, and I felt my chest tighten. I'd heard that tone before, serious, final, like a verdict was already passed. Mom chimed in, "We think it might be better if you start looking for your own place. It's just time." My stomach dropped. I blinked, trying to process the words. Wait, what? Why? My voice sounded small, almost foreign. Dad hesitated, glancing at Mom, then avoided my eyes. "Well, you know, you're difficult sometimes. And, Ava's growing up, and she needs space too. It's nothing personal." The calm cruelty in that phrasing hit me harder than any argument ever could. I tried to argue, to explain that I'd been careful, responsible, that I was barely asking for anything. "I pay my share of the bills. I clean. I stopped, seeing the way their expressions were already made up. Mom's lips pressed tight, Dad's jaw set. My words fell like pebbles into a canyon. Later that night, I packed my things. Every item felt heavier than it should. The old lamp from my college dorm, my books, the small framed picture of my first promotion, the apartment I'd quietly built a life in for the past years, suddenly felt like a coffin for my pride. Ava walked by, smiling faintly, and I could feel her watching me come, satisfied. "Good luck," she said, almost too sweetly. "You'll need it out there." I forced a smile, but inside, I was crumbling. I realized I wasn't just leaving a home, I was leaving a family that had believed a lie she fed them. A sister who had orchestrated this entire scene while I'd been too trusting to see it. The betrayal stung so sharply that I could hardly breathe, as I closed the door behind me for the first time as someone who didn't belong. A thought looped in my head like a cold mantra. Ava planned this. Every subtle dig, every whispered complaint, every tiny exaggeration, it was all a trap. And now, I was walking right into the storm she had been quietly building for years. Moving out felt like stepping off a cliff. I rented a tiny apartment, not far from my old neighborhood, the kind of place where the walls were thin, the heating barely worked, and the street noise seeped in through cracked windows. Everything I owned fit into 2 clothes, but it felt heavier than any luggage I'd ever carried each item. A reminder of the life I thought I had and the family that had betrayed me. The quiet of my new place was almost painful at first. I'd spent years blending into the background at home, and now I was alone, completely exposed to my own thoughts. Work became my anchor. I stayed late, built side projects, and threw myself into anything that could distract me from the sting of betrayal. Nights were hardest when the street was empty, my apartment silent, and I could hear only my own heartbeat echoing in the small space. I replayed every memory of Ava's smirks, her whispered conversations, the way my parents had turned against me. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I also felt something new. I refused to let her define my life any longer. Groceries, bills, cooking, I did it all alone. But slowly, I felt capable in ways I never had before. Even small victories, like figuring out a broken faucet or managing a tricky client at work, felt monumental. For the first time, I realized I was building my life entirely on my own terms. No one was there to diminish me, to twist my achievements, or to take credit for my hard work. But the loneliness was real, gnawing at me like a persistent ache. Some nights, I found myself scrolling through old family photos, questioning why they had never seen my worth. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and whisper, "Was I ever enough?" I was at rock bottom, yet for the first time in years, I also felt a flicker of control. I was broken, yes, but free. And as I locked my apartment door each night, I couldn't help but wonder what was Ava doing while I was building myself back from the ground up. Months went by, and I slowly settled into a rhythm. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, the hum of traffic outside a strange kind of lullaby. I was learning to be comfortable alone, to trust my own judgment, to celebrate my own achievements without anyone diminishing them. But just when I thought I could finally breathe, I started hearing things about Ava, little whispers that pierced through my carefully built bubble of independence. She was struggling. Job after job, she couldn't keep a position for more than a few months. Friends drifted away, frustrated by her drama and the final straw, she'd been evicted. The news hit me in waves, a strange mix of disbelief, anger, and something like quiet satisfaction. For years, she had orchestrated my downfall, and now the universe, or karma, was showing its hand. I caught myself smiling faintly when I saw the messages from mutual acquaintances. Ava had to move back in with her friend. "She's really having a rough time," one said. The details weren't mine to know, but I felt a certain grim justice in imagining her bags being packed, her face pale with panic, while she realized the safety net she always assumed would be there. WASN, single quotes T. Yet even as a small part of me savored the irony. Another part wrestled with a more complicated emotion. My parents finally see the truth. Would they finally realize what she had done to me? I wondered how long it would take for her downfall to make them question everything. I tried not to let it consume me. Nights were quieter now, but I would occasionally lie awake, listening to the city hum outside my window. Imagining Ava fumbling through her own life the way she had tried to control mine. I was free from her lies, free from her manipulations, but part of me wanted her to understand, to really feel the consequences of the years she spent tearing me down. And then, almost out of nowhere, I got a message from her. A short, desperate text. "I don't know where to go. Can you help me?" Her message blinked on my phone. Simple, but loaded. "I don't know where to go. Can you help me?" I stared at it for what felt like forever, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to slam my phone down, to ignore it, and let her face the consequences of her own actions. But another, quieter part that remembered our childhood, the sister I once thought I could trust, felt a pang of guilt, confusion. It was hard to tell. I replayed every memory of her schemes in my head. The whispers to mom and dad, the little lies she told to make me look bad, the way she smiled while planning my eviction from her own home. And yet, here she was, asking for help. The audacity was staggering. My fingers itched to type back something sharp. Something that would leave her reeling, but I didn't. I remembered the night I packed my life into boxes. Her smug "good luck out there" echoing in my mind. My apartment had been cold and empty at first, but it had slowly become my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe without her shadow looming over me. Helping her now felt like handing that sanctuary back to the person who had poisoned it. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about her vulnerability in that message. I imagined her standing on the street with her bags, panicked and desperate, maybe for the first time realizing the world didn't owe her anything. A part of me wanted to feel sorry, wanted to reach out and soften the blow. But the louder, stronger part, the part that had been crushed by her for years, argued with every fiber of my being. Let her face it. Let her live the consequences. I typed out a reply, then erased it. Typed another, deleted that one too. My heart raced, chest tight, mind spinning with every scenario. Finally, I put the phone down without sending anything. Silence, control, boundaries, justice, maybe . And as I sat back in my chair, the dim light of the apartment flickering against the walls, I couldn't shake the thought. What would she do next? Now that the quiet one she tried to destroy wasn't answering at all. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, memories swirling like a storm I couldn't escape. Every birthday she'd stolen the spotlight. Every achievement of mine brushed off as not as important. every family gathering where my words were ignored while her smallest successes were celebrated. Every single one came rushing back. I could still hear the faint echoes of their laughter, the way Mom's eyes lit up for her while mine were barely acknowledged. It made my chest ache, the weight of years of being invisible pressing down on me like a physical thing. I thought about the countless times I'd defended her, covered for her mistakes, and silently endured the insults that were disguised as concern. I remembered staying up late to fix problems she caused at home, staying quiet when she pushed me aside, and the countless nights I wondered if I was even loved for who I was or just tolerated. My anger simmered, but deeper than that was an ache I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. Betrayal. The person who should have been my ally, my family, had plotted my downfall. And yet, here she was, reaching out, pretending she needed me. I could feel the urge to respond, to act out of some misplaced loyalty. But every memory of her deceit rose up, sharp and painful. I could practically hear her voice whispering, "He'll never see it coming." And I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that she still expected me to play the part she had cast me in the silent, obedient one. Ready to clean up her mess, I walked over to the window and looked down at the street below. Lights flickering, cars passing, the city oblivious to my inner chaos. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, but tonight it felt suffocating. I clenched my fists, my jaw tight. I knew I had a choice: give her the lifeline she didn't deserve, or stay silent and finally reclaim control over my life. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Ava. "Please, I don't know what else to do. You're the only one who can help me." I stared at her message for what felt like an eternity. My thumb hovered over the screen, ready to type anything, but every possible reply felt wrong. A part of me wanted to lash out, to let her know exactly what I thought of her manipulation, her lies, the years she spent turning my own family against me. But another part, the part that had spent months building myself back up, whispered, "Silence is power." I thought back to that night I packed up my life. The sharp sting of betrayal, the hollow ache of walking away from a home that should have been mine. I remembered the sting of Mom's polite nods, Dad's distracted comments, and Ava's smirks. So subtle at first, but growing more malicious over time, and now she was asking me to step back into that chaos, as if none of it had ever happened. I set the phone down without replying. The apartment was quiet, the hum of the heater the only sound. I felt a strange mix of relief and tension, like I was holding a secret that was finally mine to keep. No one could manipulate me anymore. No one could push me into guilt or obligation. For the first time, I realized I was untouchable. Not because I was stronger than Ava, but because I refused to play her game. The next few days were a blur of normal life work. Groceries, late-night projects, but every buzz of my phone made my chest tighten. Each message from her was a reminder that she was still scrambling, still desperate, and still expecting me to bail her out. But I stayed silent, watching from a distance, letting the consequences of her actions unfold naturally, and in that silence, I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Control. I didn't have to yell, didn't have to explain, didn't have to fight to be seen. I was finally living on my own terms. And Ava, she had to figure out, all on her own, that the quiet one she tried to destroy wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. News of Ava's eviction reached the family in fragments, like gossip slipping through cracks. I heard it secondhand: friends, neighbors, even my parents muttering under their breath. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and quiet melancholy. She had finally been forced to face consequences for the chaos she had created. Part of me still mourned the years of my own invisibility. I could almost picture her frantic, packing up her things in a haze of panic, realizing that the world she had always assumed would bend for her didn't. For the first time, she was facing the cold truth that nobody owed her anything. Not my parents, not me, not even the life she had tried to claim by pushing me aside. And while part of me felt vindicated, I didn't revel in her suffering the way I might have expected. It was quieter than revenge, more potent. Her own choices were finally unspooling, and I was free from having to intervene. My parents started to notice, though slowly. Mom would glance at me, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. Dad remained silent mostly, but there was a tension, a questioning in his posture whenever Ava's name came up. I realized they were finally forced to reconcile the truth with what they had seen for years. But it was too late for me to demand recognition or apologies. I had moved past needing them to validate my experiences. I walked through my apartment, running my fingers over the smooth surface of my desk, the faint smell of coffee in the air. This was my life, now my space, my achievements, my peace. Ava's messages still came, desperate, pleading, sometimes brash, sometimes manipulative. But I never responded. I watched from a distance as she navigated the consequences of her own making, the chaos she had sown finally turning inward. And as I leaned back in my chair, listening to the city hum through my thin windows, I felt a quiet, satisfying truth settle in. I was no longer her victim. I had survived, rebuilt, and in the stillness of my apartment, I was finally untouchable. The storm she had tried to unleash on me had passed, and I was still standing. Life after Ava's downfall felt surreal at first. My apartment, once cramped and noisy, now felt like a sanctuary. The faint hum of traffic outside no longer grated on my nerves. It was a reminder that the world moved on, and so could I slowly. I began to rebuild not just my life, but myself. Nights spent scrolling through old photos, dwelling on betrayals, were replaced with evenings at the gym, new side projects, and quiet walks in the park where I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. I started celebrating small victories, again finishing a work project ahead of schedule, finally fixing that leaky faucet, cooking a meal without anyone judging the portion sizes. Each win felt monumental, not because anyone else would notice, but because I noticed. I learned the power of boundaries, of saying no to manipulation, and of placing my own mental health above anyone else's expectations. I began to understand something I hadn't before. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had to recognize it for myself first. Sometimes I'd think about Ava, about the messages she kept sending, the desperation in her tone, and I felt a flicker of emotion, anger. Yes, but also a strange clarity. I realized that every second of anxiety, every moment of pain she caused me, had forced me to grow stronger, smarter, and more independent than I ever imagined. I was no longer invisible, no longer the quiet, overlooked son. I had become someone capable of surviving betrayal without losing myself. I still kept my distance from my parents. No dramatic confrontations or apologies, just a calm understanding that they had learned the hard way. And I didn't need to intervene. My life was my own, my victories mine alone. And for the first time, the freedom I felt wasn't just about space or money, it was emotional liberation. Leaning back in my chair, I allowed myself a rare smile. I had finally reclaimed my life. And deep down, I knew the greatest revenge wasn't in confrontation or punishment. It was in thriving, quietly, without ever letting her back in. The messages kept coming, like desperate echoes bouncing off the walls of my quiet apartment. Please, I don't know where else to turn. You're the only one who can help me. Each one tempted me, flickering with old patterns of guilt and obligation. But I didn't respond. Not a word. Silence became my shield, my statement, my justice. I thought back to the years Ava spent manipulating me, twisting my parents' perception, building a house of lies that I had been forced to leave behind. I remembered the nights I lay awake, wondering if I was ever enough, if anyone would ever see me for who I really was. And now, watching from a distance as she stumbled through the consequences of her actions, I felt a strange satisfaction, not cruel, not gleeful, just quiet and absolute. My parents started noticing, slowly. Their eyes would flick toward me, hesitant, and I could see the questions forming behind their polite smiles. I didn't correct them, didn't demand apologies. I had no need to. I had already won in the only way that mattered. I had survived, rebuilt, and thrived. I was untouchable. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and late-night takeout, the hum of traffic outside a constant reminder that life moved forward. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of years of betrayal lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I could breathe. For the first time, I felt truly free. I didn't need to reply to her messages. I didn't need to intervene. The storm she had tried to unleash on me had passed. My life, my achievements, my peace all untouched by her and in that stillness, I understood the most important lesson. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't confrontation, isn't punishment, isn't proving them wrong. It's living your life on your own terms, thriving in silence, and letting the consequences of their choices speak for themselves. I poured myself a cup of coffee, looked out the window at the city lights, and smiled quietly. She was lost in chaos and I was finally, undeniably, free.